Hello there. Welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. Today we're going to talk about the Idaho Freedom Index. Now, this is more than just a way to justify getting whatever legislation I want to get passed. This is a matrix by which you can sift good bills from bad bills, well-intended legislation from, well, not so well-intended legislation. But more importantly, it's an objective standard by which we can measure the bills that are making their way through the Idaho legislature and determine, does it perform within the proper parameters of government? Does it accentuate and does it enhance and support your freedom, or does it take away from it? I've got the details on how it works coming up next.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. If you're not familiar with the Idaho Freedom Index, I'm going to encourage you, take a few moments and go to idahofreedom.org and just click on the website, and they will be more than happy to fill you in on some of the details. It's a wonderful tool, although it's interesting. You'll see some very clear pushback against this, both in mainstream press as well as from various legislators, most of whom now are retired or former legislators who found that they could say one thing and they could pretend to be Republican and they could pretend to be conservative. And yet when their actions were shown against whether they lined up with the Freedom Index or not, they had a kind of report card. And it was pretty hard to fake their way out of their actions, showing where they actually stood. They could talk a good game. Most politicians can. But when it comes to actually upholding the principles and the practices of liberty, that takes some dedication. And it helps to have a little bit of a guideline to guide you on your way. Let me show you what I mean by this so you can understand how the Idaho Freedom Foundation uses this on every piece of legislation that comes up in the Idaho legislature. So, for instance, okay, here's House Bill 5. This is currently before the legislature. This would codify and grant certain immunity to behavioral threat assessment and management teams in K through 12 schools. Now, you'll notice there's a -1 rating. And that's because at some level, I'm not going to go into all of the details. You can go to the idahofreedom.org website if you want to check these out for yourself. They're right up near the top of the page. But the question that has to be answered, well, among the questions that have to be answered, does it in any way restrict public access to information related to government activity or otherwise compromise government transparency, accountability, or election integrity? Conversely, does it increase public access to information related to government activity or increase government transparency, accountability, or election integrity? See, we're asking questions. Does it do one or does it do the other? And if it turns out, this is the crazy thing this is why we have deliberative bodies that debate these bills and go back and forth to make sure that if there is a problem, sometimes very well-intended legislation still has some things that need to be fixed. Well, when you're asking these kind of questions, you're likely to find and fix those things that need to be fixed. For instance, House Bill 6 would expand the jurisdiction of the Office of the Attorney General to include investigating and prosecuting city officials. But before this bill is passed, among the questions we want to see answered, does it in any way restrict public access to information related to government activity or otherwise compromise government transparency, accountability, or election integrity? And likewise, conversely, does it increase our access to information related to government activity? Does it increase government transparency, accountability, or election integrity? I got a couple more here. One in particular that should be of interest. Here we go. House Joint Memorial 1 would declare the legislature's rejection of Obergefell v. Hodges, which illegitimately redefined marriage and called on the U.S. Supreme Court to reverse that decision. Now, this is given a +2 rating, but look at the questions that have to be answered here first. Does it violate the principles of federalism by increasing federal authority, yielding to federal blandishments, or incorporating changeable federal laws into Idaho statutes or rules? Examples include citing federal code without noting it as it is written on a certain date, using state resources to enforce federal law, refusing to support and uphold the 10th Amendment, or conversely, does it restore or uphold the principles of federalism? So another good example. Again, this can apply in so many different ways. Here's a good one too regarding this particular resolution. Does it promote the breakdown of the traditional family or the deconstruction of societal norms? Examples include promoting or incentivizing degeneracy, violating parental rights, and compromising the innocence of children. Conversely, does it protect or uphold the structure, tenets, and values of Western society? See, reasonable people would not look at that and think, oh my gosh, it's a power grab. It's a total power grab and just a way to get all the good legislators out of there, the ones who, can be counted on to, squish their way through by saying one thing and then doing another. So let's turn our attention to something that I know is on a lot of people's minds. This is House Bill 1, which establishes a refundable education tax credit worth up to $9,500 for parents and legal guardians whose children are not enrolled in a public school. It offers education freedom for parents choosing education opportunities outside the public school system. So here's the very first question that has to be asked and answered. Now look at the rate. This is a good rating on here. So if it has this good rating, you can assume it can answer these questions the right way. Does it create, expand, or enlarge any agency, board, program, function, or activity of government? Now, I guarantee you, coming from the Idaho Freedom Foundation, it would not have a high ranking if in fact it does expand and enlarge government, because we don't look at government as the source of all of our blessings in our life. But let's quickly go through a few of the other questions that have to be answered. Does it increase barriers to entry into the market? Examples include occupational licensure, the minimum wage, restrictions on home businesses. Conversely, does it remove barriers to entry into the market? Does it directly or indirectly create or increase any taxes, fees, or other assessments? Conversely, does it eliminate or reduce any taxes, fees, or other assessments? Now, this is a big one, and this is where you're actually hearing some debate taking place on this bill that would create school choice in the state of Idaho. And it's good to have that debate. And I'll give you some of the answers to these questions as it pertains to this bill coming up here in just a moment. Here's another good one. Does it promote the breakdown of the traditional family or the deconstruction of societal norms? Does it expand the government's bureaucratic monopoly on education, reduce family and student choice, or finance education based on an institution or system? Now, let's talk a little bit about this bill. HB 1. Some are asking why HB 1, the boldest step toward unregulated school choice in the nation, was rated a +5. Here's the breakdown. Number 1, the tax credit lets non-public school families keep more of their tax dollars, up to $9,500 per kid, so they can pay for private or home options. Refundable tax credits are not redistribution because they're letting people keep their own dollars. I think I talked about this in the last episode. It's still your money. It's in your pocket. It's not passing through government hands, and therefore it's now government revenue. And they would not receive more than they paid in education expenses, right? So it's not creating a dole for people. It's letting them keep what they already have. Number 2, the bill will not cost $250 million. That is the high ceiling to ensure that all takers get the credit. In other words, it can't be limited to just a few handful. Well, these kids have special needs and they're located in some far-flung, county out in the middle of nowhere. No, this needs to be available to everybody who wishes to have true school choice. And it is a reduction in tax collections, not a government expense. I know government pretends, but that's our money. And I know they'll cry a river over their money being used for something that they don't approve of or they don't want. But it's the parents being able to use their money as they best see fit. Number 3, we expect the first year fiscal impact to be no more than $99 million in net lower taxes from the general fund. Now, that's double what the governor has proposed. Number 4, this bill allows for unregulated education freedom. This is probably what makes some of the more statist-inclined people a little bit nervous. Maximum innovation in private school options, including getting the best teachers for kids, but it does not tie homeschools or private schools to any kind of government conditions. In fact, more than anything, what this does is it gets government out of the way and allows people to make their own decisions. Now, please understand, there are a lot of people, probably you and I have been trained at some level to believe that anything that's not under government control, by definition, is out of control. We've been trained to think that where? Say it with me, in a government school. Gee, I wonder if that was just a strange coincidence that it turned out like that. Finally, homeschoolers are held harmless. Government is not allowed to regulate private or home schools regardless of serving students who may or may not claim the credit. Number 6, the bill will reduce public education costs over time because the credits are less than state spending per public school student. And they're getting more bang for the buck, would be my bet. Number 7, introducing the bill as a personal bill makes sure that Idahoans can see what good school choice looks like. It starts the conversation instead of being drored. That's why we're talking now. How about that? Yeah, sometimes the Senate President pro tem can just sit there, or the Senate President can sit there and sit on bills, or a particular chairman can keep a bill from seeing the light of day. It's not going to happen here. People are talking about it. This one's going to see the light of day. Whether it, survives or fails, that remains to be seen. But at least it's going to be discussed and debated. That deserves a fair shake. True conservative legislators support school choice. And you can see this by going back. Look at the text of Senate Bill 1038 back in 2023. Look at the legislators who supported it. This is very much in the same vein as that particular bill. So now you know a little bit about how the Freedom Index works. My recommendation is go to idahofreedom.org, spend a little bit of time on the website, and learn for yourself how these bills are ranked, why, sometimes an otherwise good bill has a bad ranking, but these are things that can be fixed. This is why there's an amendment process. This is why they debate and they give different versions of the bills to try to reconcile those differences and make sure that it's something that actually falls within the proper scope of government and positively affects your freedom, rather than negatively affects it. Oh, and your pocketbook too. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
All reporters are biased. The Idaho Press Club are biased. All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy.